The air smelled of roses and rain. It had drizzled just before the ceremony, leaving the garden damp and glistening under the fading afternoon light. Chloe's veil caught droplets of moisture as she walked down the aisle, her smile steady, her steps graceful, but her heart hammering against her ribs. She searched for Ethan's eyes, those calm, unreadable blue eyes, and found them fixed on her, a quiet warmth beneath his otherwise guarded expression. He was standing tall in a charcoal suit, hands clasped in front of him, a man who looked like he'd been carved out of composure. If she had been honest with herself, she still didn't quite understand why he'd asked her to marry him. The proposal had come after just 3 months of seeing each other seriously. They'd known each other for years, he'd been her older brother Liam's best friend since high school, but Ethan had never once hinted at anything beyond friendship until that night at Liam's engagement party. She remembered the low hum of music, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the way he'd cornered her near the balcony, saying, "Chloe, marry me." No romantic speeches, no ring ready, just a deep, steady voice that carried both urgency and certainty. She'd laughed, thinking it a joke, but he hadn't smiled back. Now, here they were. The minister's voice cut through her thoughts. "Ethan, do you take Chloe to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," he said without hesitation, his voice deep and resonant, but without the flicker of emotion she'd hoped for in that moment. When it was her turn, she tried to inject every ounce of sincerity into her "I do," willing him to feel the truth in her words. They exchanged rings, kissed, though his lips barely brushed hers, and the applause from family and friends washed over them. Chloe tried to ignore the hollow ache blooming in her chest. That night, they returned to the townhouse Ethan had bought for them in the city. It was beautiful, with clean lines, warm lighting, and the faint scent of cedar from the polished floors. She expected that once the door closed behind them, they would finally talk, finally touch. But Ethan kept himself busy, removing his tie, loosening his cuffs, pouring them each a glass of wine. He asked about her feet, whether the heels hurt, whether she'd eaten enough at the reception. When she reached for his hand, he let her hold it, but didn't draw her closer. She laughed lightly, trying to dissolve the awkwardness. "You know, most newlyweds can't wait to get out of these clothes." Ethan's mouth twitched as though he almost smiled. "We've got time, Chloe. No need to rush anything." Something in his tone, soft, almost apologetic, made her heart sink. Later, when she emerged from the shower in silk, he was already lying in bed, shirtless but with the sheets pulled high, eyes closed. She lay beside him, facing his back, wondering if she was imagining the slight tension in his shoulders. She whispered into the dark, "Good night, Ethan." He murmured something she couldn't catch. Over the next few weeks, the same pattern repeated. Dinners together, polite conversation, the occasional brush of his hand on hers, but never more. Friends assumed they were wrapped up in newlywed bliss, but in truth, their marriage felt like a carefully choreographed dance where neither of them dared step too close. Chloe told herself to be patient. Maybe he just needed time. Maybe he was afraid of moving too fast. What she didn't know, what Ethan would never tell her, was that every night he lay awake, listening to her breathing, wanting desperately to reach for her, and stopping himself. Because 6 years ago, a doctor had looked him in the eye and told him, "I'm sorry, but your chances of fathering a child are virtually zero." And Ethan, who had loved Chloe quietly for most of his adult life, would rather keep her at a safe distance than watch her dream of a family shatter in his arms. It was astonishing how quickly silence could fill a house. By the 3rd week of their marriage, Chloe had learned the rhythms of their home. Ethan woke early, made coffee, left for work without fuss. She followed later, heading to her job at the art gallery, and they'd meet again in the evenings over dinner, always polite, always safe, never intimate. From the outside, they looked perfect. A handsome, stable husband. A charming, graceful wife. A modern townhouse filled with light. Inside, they lived like polite roommates. One Friday night, Chloe returned home to find Ethan in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables with military precision. "You're cooking," she teased, setting her purse down. He didn't look up. "Thought I'd give you a break." She moved closer, standing beside him. "You know, most men just order takeout." "I'm not most men," he said, and there was a faint curve to his lips. She waited for him to meet her eyes. He didn't. "Ethan," her voice softened. "We've been married for almost a month. And I feel like I barely know you." His hand froze over the cutting board. He set the knife down carefully, then washed his hands, buying time. "You know me, Chloe. I just take things slow." She bit her lip. "Slow is fine. But this feels like nothing." He looked at her then, really looked. There was a flicker of something, pain, fear, before he masked it. "I'm sorry if it feels that way. I just want to do this right." Chloe wanted to ask what right meant to him, but the wall in his eyes told her she'd get nothing more tonight. The next morning, they drove to her parents' house for brunch. Her mother fussed over Ethan like he was a prince, and Chloe watched him play the role flawlessly, attentive, charming, even laughing at her father's bad jokes. No one would guess there was a canyon between them. Her older brother Liam pulled her aside in the kitchen. "So, how's married life treating you?" Chloe hesitated. "It's fine. Fine." Liam frowned. "What's going on?" She forced a smile. "Nothing. Just adjusting." Liam studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "If he hurts you, Chloe, you tell me." She rolled her eyes. "He's not hurting me." "Not exactly." That night, back in their townhouse, Chloe curled up on the couch while Ethan reviewed some work documents. She stared at the back of his head, willing him to look at her, to set the papers aside, to close the distance between them. Instead, he said without turning around, "Don't wait up. I'll be working late." She didn't know whether to scream or cry. In the end, she did neither. What Chloe couldn't see was the storm inside Ethan. Every time he looked at her, every time she laughed, every time she brushed against him in the kitchen, he wanted her so badly it hurt. But in his mind, wanting her meant risking breaking her heart. And Ethan Cole had never broken a promise in his life, not even the one he'd made silently to himself: "Don't let her hope for something you can't give her." The air between them had shifted. It wasn't obvious, not in the way strangers would notice, but Chloe felt it in her bones. She and Ethan had become experts at the art of polite avoidance. He would pour her coffee in the morning, ask if she needed gas in her car, remind her to take a jacket if it looked like rain. Husbandly gestures, but never a husband's touch. One Wednesday evening, she came home early from the gallery to find him in the living room, tie loosened, jacket off, sleeves rolled up as he flipped through a stack of papers. "You're home early," she said, kicking off her heels. He glanced up, startled, as though she'd caught him doing something private. "Slow day." "Slow enough." She stepped closer, hoping for something, anything, that might pull them out of this stale routine. "Ethan, can we talk?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "About what?" "Us." He sighed, setting the papers down. "Chloe." "No, don't Chloe me. I'm tired of feeling like I'm your guest instead of your wife. We don't talk about anything real. You keep me at arm's length, and I don't know why." In Ethan's head, a battle raged. He could tell her. Right now. The truth that had been burning a hole in his chest since before the wedding. He could explain about the diagnosis, the years of avoiding serious relationships, the reason he hadn't let himself touch her. Maybe she'd understand. But he pictured the look on her face, pity first, then disappointment, then the slow pulling away that would leave him alone again. So instead, he lied. "I just want to take things slow," he said. Her eyes flashed. "You've been taking things slow for 6 weeks, Ethan. At this rate, we'll still be taking things slow in 10 years. He felt the sting in her words, but he stayed silent. She shook her head, grabbing her bag again. I'm going for a walk. I can't be in here right now. That night, he heard her come back late. She didn't come upstairs. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He'd almost told her. Almost. But every time the words formed, fear strangled them. He remembered the day he'd first seen her, Liam's little sister, all shy smiles and summer dresses, coming to watch them play basketball in the driveway. She'd been too young then, but he'd noticed the light in her eyes. Over the years, that light had only grown brighter. When he finally asked her to marry him, it had been reckless and selfish. He hadn't thought about how the truth would eventually come between them. He just thought, I can't let her belong to anyone else. A week later, they attended Liam's birthday dinner. The restaurant was dimly lit, the conversation loud and overlapping. Chloe sat beside Ethan, forcing a smile while her brother told a story about their childhood. At one point, Liam leaned across the table, grinning. So, when are you two giving me a niece or nephew? Chloe laughed awkwardly. Ethan's grip tightened around his water glass. Don't rush them, Liam's fiancée teased. They're still newlyweds. The table erupted in good-natured laughter. Only Chloe noticed the way Ethan's jaw clenched. That night, in the car, she said quietly, that bothered you. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. What did? The baby comment. He forced a shrug. People should mind their own business. She studied him in the dim light of the dashboard. You really don't want kids, do you? He hesitated. It's not that simple. Then make it simple, she said, echoing the words from their fight the week before. But he didn't. In the weeks that followed, the distance became more obvious, not just to her, but to friends, to family. Liam started calling more often. Her mother invited her over for girls' lunches that were clearly just excuses to check on her. Chloe kept her answers short. We're fine. Just busy. But in the quiet moments, late at night, early in the morning, she caught herself staring at Ethan and wondering what he was hiding. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling. The guilt of keeping her at a distance was eating him alive. He found himself watching her from across rooms, memorizing the way she moved, the curve of her smile, the way her hair fell over her shoulder when she bent to read something. He wanted her. God, he wanted her. But he couldn't risk it. Not yet. It started with the rain. Not a light drizzle, but a full-on storm, wind howling through the gaps in the windows, sheets of water pounding against the glass. The power flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the townhouse into darkness. Chloe was alone in the living room when it happened. She'd been curled on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when everything went black. A second later, she heard the front door open. Ethan stepped inside, shaking the rain from his hair. He was drenched, his shirt clinging to him, tie hanging loose around his neck. Power's out? He asked. Yeah, she said, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. He set his briefcase down, glanced toward the kitchen. I'll find the candles. The flicker of candlelight softened everything, the room, the tension between them, even his face. Shadows danced along the walls as he set 2 candles on the coffee table, the faint smell of rain still clinging to him. They sat across from each other at first, the storm a constant roar outside. This reminds me of when I was a kid, she said after a while. Liam and I used to camp out in the living room whenever the power went out. Ethan smiled faintly. We used to do that too. Only difference was, Liam would steal all the blankets. She laughed, the sound carrying through the dim room. For a moment, they weren't guarded husband and frustrated wife, they were just 2 people sharing the same memory from different angles. When the rain grew heavier, he disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a half-empty bottle of red wine. No dinner tonight, he said, pouring into 2 glasses. But we can drink until we forget we're hungry. She raised her glass in mock salute. To Storm survival. They drank. The wine was warm and smooth, loosening the edges of their conversation. They started talking, really talking, for the first time in weeks. She told him about the difficult client at the gallery who wanted a giant portrait of himself on horseback. He told her about the disaster at work involving a missed shipment and a furious investor. She laughed until her cheeks hurt. He smiled more than she'd seen in months. At some point, she shifted to sit beside him. Not close enough to touch, not yet, but close enough to feel the pull. The wine made her bold. You know, she said, we never really had a honeymoon. His smile faded slightly. I know. She tilted her head, studying him in the candlelight. Why? He hesitated, the truth hovering on his lips. Because he stopped himself, shaking his head. It just didn't feel like the right time. She set her glass down. When will it be? He looked at her then, really looked. Her hair fell loose around her face, her eyes reflecting the candlelight, her lips parted just slightly. Something inside him cracked. It happened slowly at first, a brush of his fingers against hers, a moment of stillness where neither of them moved. Then, like a tide breaking, he leaned in. The kiss was tentative at first, then hungrier, as if weeks of restraint had suddenly collapsed under their own weight. She made a small sound in her mouth, her hands sliding up his chest. His own hands moved to her, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. The storm raged outside, but inside, all Ethan could feel was her, warm, alive, real. Later, they lay together in the soft glow of dying candlelight, her head resting against his shoulder. He traced back, his mind a tangled knot of relief, guilt, and fear. For that moment, though, he let himself believe it could be simple. That he could be the husband she deserved. But as Chloe drifted to sleep, a thought gnawed at him. What happens when she learns the truth? The morning after felt different. Not in the way Chloe had expected. She woke to the smell of coffee and the soft clink of dishes downstairs. For a moment, she just lay there, smiling to herself. Her body was sore in new ways, her skin still warm from the memory of his touch. Finally, she thought. Finally, we're starting our marriage. Ethan was in the kitchen, already dressed for work. His shirt was crisp, hair neatly combed, the image of composure, except for the faint shadows under his eyes. Morning, she said, stepping into the room. He looked up briefly, his expression unreadable. Morning. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. Last night was, she hesitated, waiting for him to fill the silence. He didn't. It was good, she finished, trying to keep her tone light. He turned in her arms, pressing a brief kiss to her forehead. We should talk later. I'm late for a meeting. And just like that, he was gone. Chloe stood in the kitchen long after the door closed behind him. She told herself not to overthink it, he was just busy, right? But the part of her that had been holding on to hope for weeks felt that familiar ache creeping back in. The days that followed were a strange mix of closeness and distance. Some mornings, he'd pour her coffee without being asked. Other nights, he'd retreat into his study as though nothing had changed. She tried to be patient. Maybe he was just processing. Maybe one night together after weeks of hesitation had unsettled him. But then a week passed. Then 2. And still, he didn't reach for her again. One afternoon at the gallery, Chloe felt a wave of dizziness. She gripped the edge of the reception desk until it passed. You okay? Mia asked, eyeing her with concern. Yeah, just, skipped breakfast. But it happened again the next day, and the next. By the end of the week, Mia was the one to say it, you should take a test. Chloe almost laughed. But later that night, alone in the bathroom while Ethan worked late, she stared at the little white stick in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines. She sat down hard on the edge of the tub, her heart pounding in her ears. She and Ethan had been together once. And now, twins. That thought didn't even occur to her yet, she was still reeling from the first truth. When Ethan came home, she almost told him. The words hovered at the tip of her tongue as she followed him into the kitchen. But he looked tired, distracted, already loosening his tie and talking about a problem at work. So she said nothing. Not yet. She needed to figure out what this meant. For her, for them, for the fragile marriage they'd barely started. The secret sat in Chloe's chest like a stone. Every morning, she thought, today, I'll tell him. And every evening, when he came home late or retreated into his study, she told herself to wait for a better moment. The truth was, she was afraid. Afraid that he wouldn't want the baby. Afraid that he wouldn't want her. On Sunday, they visited Liam and his fiancée for a casual lunch. Chloe thought she could hide her exhaustion, but midway through dessert, she caught Liam watching her closely. "You okay, Chloe?" he asked. "Fine," she said quickly. "Just a little tired." Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. On the drive home, the silence in the car felt different, charged, almost brittle. "You've been quiet lately," Ethan said, eyes on the road. "So have you," she replied. He didn't answer. That night, while Ethan showered, Chloe stood in their bedroom with the test in her hand. She traced the edges of the little plastic stick, staring at the 2 pink lines as if they might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. From the bathroom came the sound of running water. She could tell him now. She could knock on the door, hold it out, and let the truth spill into the steam. Her pulse quickened. She took one step forward, then stopped. Ethan stepped out minutes later, towel around his waist, hair damp, eyes tired. He moved toward his dresser without looking at her. "Long day?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he murmured, pulling on a t-shirt. "Tomorrow's going to be worse." The moment slipped away, like it always did. That night, she lay awake listening to the rain start up again. She thought of that other night, the one time they'd truly been together. Her hand drifted to her stomach. She closed her eyes and pictured tiny heartbeats, unseen but real. She didn't know yet how she would tell him. Only that she couldn't keep it hidden much longer. In the dark, Ethan turned onto his side, facing away from her. He stared at the wall, thinking about the way she'd been looking at him lately, searching for something he wasn't giving her. She deserves more than this, he thought. More than me. And neither of them knew yet that their lives were already changing. The decision came to Chloe in the middle of a Monday morning. She was arranging a new display at the gallery, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The weight of the secret had become unbearable. No more waiting, she told herself. No more perfect moment. I'm just going to tell him. That evening, she made dinner, real dinner, not takeout or something from the freezer. Her hands worked on autopilot, slicing vegetables, stirring sauce, setting the table for 2. She even lit candles, though she wasn't sure if it was for atmosphere or courage. When Ethan walked in, the smell hit him first. He paused in the doorway, loosening his tie. "This is unexpected. I wanted us to have a nice meal," she said, forcing a smile. He glanced at her warily, as if sensing there was more beneath the surface. They ate in relative silence. Chloe pushed her food around her plate more than she actually ate. Finally, she set down her fork. "I have something to tell you." Ethan's posture shifted slightly. "Okay." Her heart pounded. "I'm pregnant." The word hung in the air, fragile and heavy at the same time. For a moment, Ethan didn't react at all. It was like the sentence hadn't reached him. Then his eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in stunned disbelief. "What? You heard me, she said softly. I'm pregnant. His chair scraped against the floor as he pushed back. How? Her brow furrowed. What do you mean, how? I mean, he stopped, raking a hand through his hair. Chloe, we've only been together once. I know, she said. That's all it takes. He stood, pacing a few steps away, his mind spinning. The old diagnosis rang in his head like a siren, virtually zero chance. It wasn't impossible, but it was so close to impossible that for years he'd built his life around the assumption that it would never happen. And now, she was telling him it had. When he turned back to her, his voice was lower, almost cautious. Are you sure? She stared at him, hurt flashing in her eyes. Yes, Ethan. I'm sure. Silence stretched between them. Finally, he asked the question he immediately hated himself for. Is it mine? Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. What did you just say? You have to understand. No, I don't have to understand anything, she snapped. You've been keeping me at a distance for weeks, making me feel like a stranger in my own marriage, and now I finally tell you we're having a baby and your first instinct is to doubt me? Ethan closed his eyes briefly, guilt washing over him. I'm sorry. Just what? He opened his mouth, but the truth stuck in his throat. How could he tell her about the infertility diagnosis now, without it sounding like an accusation? When he didn't answer, she stood, her chair legs scraping harshly against the floor. I can't do this right now. She grabbed her coat and walked out, the front door slamming behind her. Ethan stood in the quiet kitchen. The candles flickering in her absence, and felt the ground shift beneath his feet. What neither of them knew yet was that this wasn't just a pregnancy. At her next appointment, Chloe would learn there were 2 heartbeats. The door slammed so hard the sound echoed through the townhouse, leaving Ethan standing in the middle of the dining room like someone had pulled the air out of his lungs. The candles flickered. The food cooled. And still he couldn't move. He had replayed the moment in his head 100 times already, her eyes, wide and vulnerable when she'd said the words. The way his own voice had betrayed him with that single, ugly question, is it mine? God, what was wrong with him? Chloe walked quickly through the rain, her coat clutched tight around her. She didn't have a destination in mind, she just needed space. Her feet carried her toward the coffee shop 2 blocks away, though it was already closed. She stood under the awning for a long moment, breathing in the damp air, trying to calm the tremor in her hands. This wasn't how she'd pictured it. She'd imagined his shock, yes, but then joy, relief, maybe. She'd imagined them holding each other, laughing nervously, maybe even crying together. Instead, he'd looked at her like she was a stranger who had just dropped a bomb in his living room. Ethan eventually sat down at the table, his head in his hands. He wanted to go after her. But what would he say? Sorry I doubted you, but the truth is I've believed for years that I can't have kids. That sounded like an excuse, not an apology. And yet, the diagnosis had been the defining wall of his adult life. He'd built everything, his relationships, his marriage, around the belief that he was incapable of fathering a child. If Chloe was pregnant, then one of 2 things was true. Either the doctor had been wrong. Or. He didn't let himself finish the thought. When Chloe finally returned an hour later, her hair was damp, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She didn't say a word as she passed him in the hallway and headed upstairs. He followed. Chloe, please. She turned on him, eyes bright with unshed tears. You could have asked me anything else. Anything. But you went straight to doubting me. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. Her voice wavered, but her gaze was steady. You've been keeping something from me since the day we got married. And now I'm wondering if it's the same thing that made you ask me that question tonight. He froze. What are you talking about? She shook her head, brushing past him into the bedroom. Forget it. I'm tired. He stood outside the door long after she'd closed it, listening to the muffled sound of her moving around inside. The distance between them had never felt wider. And yet, beneath the fear, something else was stirring, an almost unbearable thought. If the baby really was his, then maybe, just maybe, the life he'd never thought possible was within reach. Downstairs, the 2 candles on the table had burned down to stubs, wax pooling on the white tablecloth. Upstairs, Chloe lay on her side, one hand resting lightly over her stomach, as though protecting what was inside her. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. Chloe sat on the edge of the examination table, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes fixed on the glossy poster of fetal development pinned to the wall. Ethan sat in a chair beside her, straight-backed, his suit jacket folded neatly over his knees. It was the first time in weeks they'd been in the same room without the buffer of other people. Neither had spoken much on the drive over. The nurse took Chloe's vitals, then left them alone for a few minutes before the doctor came in, a calm, middle-aged woman with a gentle smile. "Congratulations," she said, shaking Chloe's hand. "We'll do a quick ultrasound today to confirm the pregnancy and check that everything's progressing well." Chloe nodded, her throat suddenly dry. She lay back, the crinkling of the paper beneath her loud in the quiet room. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat, his gaze locked on the monitor. The doctor prepped the wand, applied the cool gel, and pressed it lightly against Chloe's lower abdomen. A grainy black and white image bloomed on the screen. At first, it was just abstract shapes and shadows, until 2 distinct, rhythmic flickers appeared. "There they are," the doctor said softly. 2 strong heartbeats. Chloe's head snapped toward her. 2. Ethan blinked. "Did you say, 2? The doctor smiled. "Yes. You're carrying twins." For a moment, Chloe couldn't breathe. She felt Ethan's eyes on her but didn't turn to meet them. "Twins," she whispered, almost to herself. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice low. That's incredible." But in his chest, his heart was pounding, not from excitement alone, but from the realization that the odds of this happening by accident, to a man who was supposedly infertile, were astronomical. If Chloe had been unfaithful, which his gut told him she hadn't, there was no way she would have told him like this. Which meant, maybe the doctor all those years ago had been wrong. After the appointment, they walked to the car in silence. The news still hovered between them, surreal and fragile. Once they were inside, Chloe finally said, "You don't have to pretend to be happy if you're not." Ethan turned to her, startled. "Why would I pretend?" "Because you didn't believe me at first," she said, her voice breaking. "And now I don't know what's real with you anymore." He swallowed hard. "Chloe. I've never doubted you. I doubted myself." Her brow furrowed. "What does that even mean?" He hesitated. This was it, the moment to tell her everything. But the words felt too heavy in his mouth, and the car was too small, too quiet, too fragile a place for truths that could break them. "Nothing," he said finally, starting the engine. "We'll talk later." But Chloe turned her face to the window, watching the city pass in a blur, wondering if later would ever come. And Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter, knowing that later couldn't be avoided. After the appointment, they walked to the car in silence. The news still hovered between them, surreal and fragile. Once they were inside, Chloe finally said, "You don't have to pretend to be happy if you're not." Ethan turned to her, startled. "Why would I pretend?" "Because you didn't believe me at first," she said, her voice breaking. "And now I don't know what's real with you anymore." He swallowed hard. "Chloe. I've never doubted you. I doubted myself." Her brow furrowed. "What does that even mean?" He hesitated. This was it, the moment to tell her everything. But the words felt too heavy in his mouth, and the car was too small, too quiet, too fragile a place for truths that could break them. "Nothing," he said finally, starting the engine. "We'll talk later." But Chloe turned her face to the window, watching the city pass in a blur, wondering if later would ever come. And Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter, knowing that later couldn't be avoided much longer. Because the truth was already beating inside her, twice over. The ride home felt longer than it should have, the air thick with unspoken words. Chloe kept her gaze fixed on the window, the city flashing past in streaks of gray and gold. Every time Ethan glanced at her, her profile was unreadable, calm, but in a way that made his chest tighten. At a red light, he finally said, "Twins, it's a lot to take in." She gave a small nod without looking at him. "You don't have to keep saying that like you're trying to convince yourself." "I'm not," he stopped, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I'm trying to process it, Chloe. That's all." Her voice was low, almost flat. "You've been processing since the day we got married. When does it turn into actually letting me in?" The light turned green, and he didn't answer. When they pulled into the driveway, Chloe got out before he could come around to open her door. She walked inside, hanging her coat without a word, then went upstairs. Ethan stayed in the foyer for a long moment, his keys still in his hand. Upstairs, Chloe sat on the edge of their bed, one hand pressed to her stomach. The doctor's words echoed in her mind, 2 strong heartbeats. She should have been overjoyed. And she was, somewhere deep down. But that joy was clouded by the memory of Ethan's face the night she told him, by the gnawing suspicion that something about his reaction didn't add up. Downstairs, Ethan poured himself a glass of water and didn't drink it. 2 strong heartbeats. The doctor's voice from years ago clashed against today's news, the contradiction growing louder in his mind. He thought about the test results, the sterile office, the cold finality in the man's tone. "Your chances are virtually zero." Virtually. Not completely. He set the glass down, jaw tightening. There was only one way to know for sure. Later that night, when Chloe came down for tea, he was sitting at the dining table, staring at his phone. "I'm going to be out tomorrow," he said. She looked up. "Where?" "Just an errand." She studied him for a moment, her instincts telling her it was more than that. But she just nodded. "Fine." When she was gone again, Ethan's thumb hovered over the phone screen before pressing the call button. "Dr. Langley's office," a voice answered. "I need to schedule a meeting," Ethan said. His voice was calm, but inside, everything was moving too fast. That night, they lay in the same bed, backs turned to each other, both pretending to be asleep. Both knowing the truth, whatever it was coming for them soon. The next morning, Chloe woke to the sound of the shower running. Ethan's side of the bed was cold. She sat up slowly, pressing a hand to her stomach. It was still strange, the thought that 2 lives were growing there. She should have felt nothing but joy. But the memory of Ethan's face in the clinic, his shock, his wariness, kept cutting into the moment like a jagged edge. When he came out of the bathroom, steam curling around him, she tried to catch his gaze. "You're quiet again," she said. He paused at the dresser. "I'm just thinking." "About what?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing you need to worry about." The way he said it made her want to scream. "Ethan, you can't keep doing this," she said, her voice tight. "Shutting me out, dodging my questions. We're married. You don't get to decide which parts of yourself I'm allowed to know." His jaw flexed, but he didn't look at her. "I'm not trying to shut you out." "Then what are you doing?" she demanded. He met her eyes then, and for a moment she thought he might finally tell her. But instead, he pulled on his shirt and said, "I have somewhere I need to be later." She stared at him, frustration sparking in her chest. "And you're not going to tell me where?" "It's nothing," he said. "Just something I need to check on." Something in his tone told her pressing would be pointless. They moved around each other in silence for the rest of the morning. When Ethan left for work, he kissed her on the cheek, not coldly, but with a certain restraint that made it feel like an obligation instead of a choice. The door clicked shut behind him, and Chloe stood in the kitchen for a long time, her tea going cold on the counter. She knew something was coming. She could feel it, like the charged air before a storm. She just didn't know if it was going to save them, or destroy everything. By afternoon, the silence between them had settled into something almost physical, like a third person in the house, following them from room to room. Chloe tried to busy herself with laundry, answering a few emails from the gallery, but her mind kept circling back to the look in Ethan's eyes at the clinic. Shock, yes. But also something else. Something that had nothing to do with her. Around 4, she heard him in the hallway, talking quietly on the phone. She couldn't make out the words, but his tone was clipped, purposeful. When she stepped into the hall, the conversation stopped. He was standing with his back to her, phone still in hand. Who was that? She asked. Work, he said without turning around. Her stomach tightened. You always say that when you don't want to tell me the truth. He turned then, meeting her gaze evenly. Chloe, not every conversation I have is about us. Maybe not, she said, but lately every silence is. He looked like he might respond, but instead he slid his phone into his pocket and walked past her into the kitchen. The dismissal stung more than if he'd shouted. That night at dinner, she barely tasted her food. He kept glancing at her like he wanted to say something, but each time his eyes dropped back to his plate. When they cleared the dishes, she said quietly, I don't know how much longer I can keep feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. His hands stilled over the sink. I know, he said. But he didn't add anything else. Later, when she came upstairs, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, tying his shoes. It's late, she said. Where are you going? Just for a drive, he replied. She folded her arms. You're keeping something from me, Ethan. And when I find out what it is, I hope to God it's worth all this distance you've put between us. He didn't meet her eyes. I'll be back soon, see. She listened to the sound of the front door closing, her pulse pounding in her ears. Down the street, his car engine started, then faded into the night. For the first time since she'd known him, Chloe wasn't entirely sure he was coming back the same man. Ethan drove through the city with no music playing, the hum of the engine his only company. He knew the address by heart, even though it had been years since he'd stepped into that office. Dr. Langley, urology specialist. The man who'd looked him in the eye 8 years ago and told him fatherhood was virtually impossible. The clinic was in an older building downtown. The waiting room hadn't changed, same beige chairs, same potted fern in the corner, same smell of disinfectant and stale coffee. The receptionist looked up from her computer. Mr. Cole. We haven't seen you in a while. It's been a long time, Ethan said. Is Dr. Langley in? She tapped her keyboard. He's with a patient, but he can see you in 20 minutes. When the doctor finally emerged, he looked older, thinner, but his handshake was still firm. Ethan Cole, he said. This is a surprise. I need to talk to you about something from my last visit here, Ethan said. They went into his office, closing the door behind them. I don't know if you remember, Ethan began, but 8 years ago, you told me my sperm count was extremely low. You said my chances of fathering a child were virtually zero, the doctor finished. Yes, I remember. Ethan's jaw tightened. Well, my wife is pregnant. With twins. Langley leaned back in his chair, eyebrows rising. That's unexpected. The doctor pulled a file from the cabinet, Ethan's file, thick with old notes. He scanned it, frowning. Your initial test results did show low count and motility. But, he flipped a page, his frown deepening. It seems there was a second analysis ordered, but no record of us discussing it. What did it say? Ethan asked, his voice low. Langley hesitated. The second test was within normal ranges. Still on the lower end, but well within the possibility of natural conception. If we never discussed this, he sighed. Then that was a failure on my part. Ethan sat back, the words hitting like a punch. 8 years. 8 years of holding people at a distance, of avoiding relationships, of building walls between himself and the life he wanted, because of a mistake. And Chloe. God, Chloe. He'd kept her at arm's length, doubted her, hurt her, all because of a truth that wasn't even true. Meanwhile, across town, Chloe sat in the living room with her phone in her hand. She'd texted Mia earlier, trying to distract herself, but her friend's gentle, "Are you okay?" had made her throat tighten. She glanced at the clock. Ethan had been gone for over 2 hours. For the first time, she let herself think it, what if he doesn't want these babies? What if he's trying to find a way out? At the clinic, Ethan stood in the hallway after the meeting, his hands braced on the cool wall. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt an almost crushing weight. Because now he had no excuse. He wasn't infertile. He'd never been infertile. Which meant Chloe's pregnancy was his. Ethan didn't remember much of the drive back. The city blurred past, light smearing in the drizzle, every thought tangled around the same truth: he could have had this life all along. The life he denied himself. The life he denied her. He pulled into a quiet side street a few blocks from home and just sat there, hands gripping the wheel. How did you tell someone that every cold shoulder, every unanswered question, every lonely night was built on a lie? Not her lie. His. The weight of it pressed against his chest until his breathing turned shallow. Back at the house, Chloe sat curled on the couch under a blanket, but she wasn't reading or watching TV. Her phone sat face down on the coffee table. The cup of tea she'd made earlier was untouched, its surface cooled to a thin film. She kept thinking about the way he'd left that night, no explanation, no real destination. Just "I'll be back soon." Maybe it was her hormones, maybe it was weeks of feeling like she was reaching for someone who was always one step away, but for the first time since they'd married, she wondered if she truly knew him at all. The front door opened quietly, almost guiltily. Ethan stepped in, hanging his coat with more care than necessary. "You're still up," he said softly. "Couldn't sleep," she replied. He hesitated in the doorway, then walked toward her. For a moment, he looked like he might sit beside her, close the space between them. But instead, he stayed standing. "I'm sorry for the way I've been," he said finally. "You don't deserve it." Her eyes searched his face. "Then why, Ethan? Why have you kept me out?" He could feel the confession pressing at the back of his throat, about the misdiagnosis, the years of believing he couldn't be a father, the fear that had shaped every move he'd made with her. But the words caught, heavy and jagged. "I just needed time," he said instead. Her expression shuddered, as if she'd just been given the same vague excuse she'd heard before. "I'm going to bed." When she passed him, he almost reached for her, but his hand stayed at his side. In the quiet that followed, he knew he couldn't wait much longer. The truth was already between them, even if she didn't know its shape yet. And if he didn't tell her soon, there might not be a marriage left to save. Ethan's throat was dry, but the words finally came. 8 years ago, I was told I couldn't have children," he began. "The doctor said my chances were virtually zero. I believed him. I built my life around that. I didn't want to marry anyone who wanted a family, because I thought I'd never be able to give them one." Chloe's eyes didn't soften. She stayed still, her arms folded. "When I asked you to marry me," he went on, "I already loved you more than I should have. But I told myself I'd be protecting you if I kept my distance. If I didn't start something I couldn't finish." Her brow furrowed. "Protecting me? By shutting me out. Yes, he admitted. It was stupid. I see that now. I thought if we didn't get too close, you wouldn't dream about a family I couldn't give you. Chloe's voice was quiet, but her words were sharp. And when I told you I was pregnant, you thought, what? That I'd been with someone else. Ethan flinched. I didn't want to think it. But it was the only explanation I had, until yesterday. What happened yesterday? She asked warily. I went back to that doctor, he said. Found out there'd been a second test, one they never told me about. It showed I was fine. I've been able to have children all along. I built all of this, he gestured between them, on a lie I didn't know was a lie. Chloe's arms dropped to her sides. Her face was pale, unreadable. So all this time, you could have had what we have now. You could have let yourself love me, be with me, trust me. And instead, I let fear make every decision, he said. And I hurt you. I know I did. But Chloe, these babies are mine. I never doubted you, not in my heart. I doubted myself. She turned away, moving toward the window. Do you know how lonely it's been? To live with someone who's supposed to be your partner and feel like you're on your own. Yes, he said quietly. Because I've been lonely too. I put myself there, and I'm sorry. I want to change that. I will change that. But I need you to give me the chance. Her shoulders rose and fell with her breathing. Finally, she said, I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can, Chloe said, her voice catching. You've been a ghost in our marriage, Ethan. I kept reaching for you, and you kept pulling away. How do I trust that you won't disappear again the second things get hard? Ethan stepped closer, closing some of the distance between them. Because now I know what it's like to almost lose you. And I'm not willing to live without you, or without them. His gaze dropped briefly to her stomach. Her arms instinctively wrapped around herself, a shield against the flood of emotions threatening to break her composure. I'm carrying 2 babies, she said quietly. I can't afford to let them grow up watching their parents barely touch, barely talk. I want a home filled with love, Ethan. Not walls. I'll tear every wall down, he said, his voice fierce. I'll show up for you, every day, in every way I should have from the start. Not because I have to. Because I want to. Because I love you. Chloe turned to face him, searching his eyes for cracks or hesitation. Love isn't just words, Ethan. It's proof. It's consistency. It's you being here when you say you'll be here, and opening up even when it's uncomfortable. I know, he said. And I'm ready to prove it. She let out a long, shaky breath. You might not get another chance if you fail. I won't fail, he said, and for the first time in weeks, there was no shadow of doubt in his voice. Still, when she brushed past him on her way upstairs, she didn't touch his hand. And when he followed a few minutes later, she was already in bed, facing the wall. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching her in the dim light, feeling both closer to her than he had in months, and still miles away. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the monitors and the soft, rhythmic breaths of the newborn twins sleeping in their bassinets. Ethan stood between them, his large hands cradling their impossibly small fingers. One tiny fist curled around his thumb, the other twitched in a dream. For a long time, he just looked at them, really looked, marveling at the miracle they were. His children. The truth still felt new on his tongue. 2 days earlier, he'd been pacing this same room while Chloe breathed through contractions, her hand gripping his with surprising strength. She'd asked nothing of him except to be there. And for once, he hadn't hesitated. He'd been at her side for every moment, fetching ice chips, rubbing her back, whispering encouragement into her ear. And when the twins' cries filled the room, he'd felt something inside him break open and rearrange itself forever. Now, as Chloe stirred in the bed, her eyes fluttering open. Ethan turned toward her. "You should be resting," she murmured. "I can't stop looking at them," he said, glancing back at the bassinets. "I don't want to miss a second." She studied him for a long moment, and in her gaze he saw the questions she hadn't asked yet, and the ones she still might not. "Ethan," she said softly, "you've been different these past months. Since that night we talked. I told you I'd prove it," he said. "I meant it." He moved to her side, taking her hand in his. "I wasted so much time thinking I was protecting you by keeping my distance. I can't get those months back. But I can spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to wonder where I stand." Her fingers tightened around his. "And if I need reminding?" "I'll remind you every day," he said, his voice steady. She looked at him for a long moment before leaning back against the pillows, her hand still in his. "We'll see," she whispered, but her eyes softened in a way they hadn't in months. Ethan bent to kiss her forehead, then crossed back to the bassinets. He reached in and lifted one of the babies, cradling the tiny body against his chest. The second twin stirred, and he smiled. "Don't worry," he murmured, his voice warm and sure. "I'm here now. And I'm never going anywhere." The vow wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. But Chloe heard it, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself believe it. "If you want, I can also give you an epilogue set a year later, showing how Ethan kept that vow and how their family has grown stronger. Would you like me to add that?" The nurse came in quietly to check the twins' vitals, smiling when she saw Ethan holding one of them. "You're a natural," she whispered. Ethan gave a small smile. "Feels like I've been waiting my whole life for this and didn't even know it." Chloe watched him from the bed. For months, she had carried a knot of doubt in her chest, but watching him now, the way he moved carefully, the way his voice softened when he spoke to the babies, loosened something in her she hadn't realized was still wound tight. Later that afternoon, when visitors had gone and the room was theirs again, Ethan sat beside her bed. He rested his forearms on his knees, leaning forward. "I need to say this, Chloe. I know my words can't erase the past, but I can't leave them unsaid." She glanced at him, silent, letting him go on. "I didn't just shut you out because I was afraid of letting you down. I shut myself out of the life I wanted because I thought I didn't deserve it. And when you told me about the babies, I panicked. I said things I can't take back." Her eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. "I don't want to be the man who hides anymore," he continued. "I want to be the man you can count on, the one who shows up even when it's hard. For you. For them." Chloe reached for his hand, her thumb brushing over his knuckles. "Actions, Ethan. That's all I need now." "You'll have them," he promised. That night, long after the hospital lights dimmed, Ethan woke to the sound of one twin fussing. He was out of bed before Chloe even stirred, lifting the baby and rocking gently until the cries faded. When he glanced back at the bed, Chloe was watching him with a tired but genuine smile. And for the first time since their wedding, he felt the wall between them start to crumble for real. The sun spilled into the small living room of their Lagos townhouse, casting a golden glow over toys scattered across the floor. The twins, now toddling on unsteady legs, were a whirl of energy and laughter. Ethan sat cross-legged on the rug, letting them crawl over him, their small hands tugging at his shirt. Chloe leaned in the doorway, watching, her heart fuller than she'd thought possible a year ago. They'd had hard days, sleepless nights, tense conversations, moments where the old walls between them tried to rise again. But Ethan had kept his promise. He was there. Not just in the room, but present. Changing diapers at 3 a.m., cooking breakfast on Saturdays, telling Chloe everything, his fears, his hopes, his love for her in 100 little ways. One of the twins squealed, falling into Ethan's arms. He caught the child easily, pressing a kiss to a soft, curly head before looking up at Chloe with a grin. "Your turn," he said, gesturing for her to join them. She crossed the room, sinking to the floor beside him. The twins wriggled between them, and Ethan's arm slipped around her shoulders, pulling her close. They sat there for a moment, just the four of them, while the morning light turned everything warm and gold. Chloe rested her head against Ethan's shoulder. "I'm glad you stayed," she whispered. "I told you," he murmured, kissing her hair. "I'm never going anywhere." And in that quiet, ordinary moment, Chloe believed him completely. They sat there for a moment, just the four of them, while the morning light turned everything warm and gold. Chloe rested her head against Ethan's shoulder. "I'm glad you stayed," she whispered. "I told you," he murmured, kissing her hair. "I'm never going anywhere." And in that quiet, ordinary moment, Chloe believed him completely.